over often. In the 60s, when they were teenagers, Coach and Dad had tipped buckets. They snuck up and tipped buckets of fish in the harbor, hauling ass through the golf course before the guy in a Vienna beef uniform could catch them. That was when South Shore was still Jewish and Irish, before expressways and white flight and manicured suburbs. When the guy in a Vienna beef uniform caught Dad, he dangled Dad by his ankles over the harbor and promised to drown him. There was a moral to that story, but Dad was never sure what it was. Coach thought the moral was don't fuck with anybody in a Vienna beef uniform. When they were growing up, Harold Washington was mayor. The Jews and Irish were almost gone. A few stubborn old men refused to leave, clung to their porches until death, didn't care about the neighborhood's changing color. Dad and Coach would recite poetry by the water. Dad, once, wanted to get a doctorate in high Renaissance art. Coach, once, wanted to play in northern Italy, make a modest living around high culture. When they were young, Dad and Coach rode their bikes through the highlands. When Dad started taking me to see Coach, Mom thought Dad was toughening me up by letting me witness a broken man break further. There wasn't anything tough about Coach. His wife had left him with 2 babies and moved to Florida. Dad took me to see Coach because Dad thought Coach was capable of murder-suicide. The first time Dad took me to Coach's apartment, 5 of us sat in 3 plastic chairs on Coach's shag rug. Dad bounced the babies on his knees. The empty fireplace overflowed with dusty trophies. When Coach started crying, Dad made me go into the bedroom with the babies. One Thanksgiving, when I was 5, Dad invited Coach over. Paul sat in the living room, watched Detroit struggle against Green Bay, and grunted when Coach pushed the double-wide pink stroller through the door. "Paul," Coach said. Paul was Grandma's friend. Coach handed the babies off to Mom and sat next to Paul on the couch. The game was enough to get Coach and Paul drunk off excitement. Dad wanted to get drunk too. Mom and Grandma kept yelling from the kitchen. Dad gave me a beer at dinner, which turned into a fight. "What do you want my grandson to be?" Grandma said. "What do you want our son to be?" Mom said. "This is a party, and I don't want him to feel left out," Dad said. "My grandson is not a follower," Grandma said. "He is his own man." "My son will be a force in the world," Mom said. "A father can give his son a beer whenever he wants. I can give my son a beer whenever I want." Dad slammed the table. Nobody looked at me. While they argued, I chugged the beer as fast as possible. Grandma, Mom, and Dad looked at Coach, who was flinging mashed potatoes at a giggling Paul. He used his fork as a slingshot. Mom slammed the table. Paul wiped the potatoes from his face. Coach turned toward Mom, raised his weapon, and hit Mom on the neck so clumps fell down her blouse. Grandma gasped while laughing. Her bracelets jingled when she grabbed her chest. Dad went for another beer. Paul called Coach a bastard. I felt lightheaded and sick. The babies crying marked the end of Thanksgiving. Mom held open the front door, held back her own tears. Dad told me to get my coat. Jeffrey Avenue felt quiet. Cars dodged potholes with grace. Coach stood at the stoplight and didn't say a word. We all smiled, waited for the light to change, looked at a bus struggle to a stop, and nodded at the faces in the window. Outside Coach's building, I knelt in front of the babies. Dad grabbed Coach behind his neck. "Are you going to be okay?" Dad said. "Can you come upstairs?" Coach asked. "Please?" Dad carried the babies. I folded the stroller